A woman at a crowded airport stopped a quiet man in a worn black hoodie from boarding first class. She thought she was enforcing the rules until phones began recording, passengers started whispering, and the man she redirected calmly revealed a truth that would shake the entire flight. What he said next changed everything. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The airport was still half asleep when Olivia Park arrived at Gate B12. Pre-dawn light pressed weakly against the tall glass windows, mixing with the cold hum of fluorescent bulbs that washed everything in a pale glow. It was the hour when most travelers moved in slow silence, dragging suitcases toward early morning departures. And Olivia always felt a steady sense of control at this time. The quiet made her job easier. The predictability calmed her. Her uniform was perfect, as always. The blazer lay flat across her shoulders, with not a single crease out of place. Her ID badge rested exactly 2 inches above her pocket, facing forward, easy to read. Her black hair was pulled into a tight twist she had practiced for years, a style that never shifted even on chaotic travel days. Olivia believed discipline was a form of kindness. If she could keep the gate in order, passengers would feel safe. That was her rule. She stood behind the boarding podium, scanning boarding passes with her usual measured warmth. She greeted each passenger by name, offering a small, collected smile that matched the energy of a woman who had memorized every step of the morning routine. A quick glance toward the growing line told her everything she needed to know. Families clustered in the pre-board area. Business travelers clutched coffee cups. A musician in a long coat held a violin case close to her chest. Nothing unusual. Nothing unpredictable. The boarding screen above her flickered softly, displaying the destination: San Francisco to New York. Flight 3719. First class was nearly full for the morning flight, and Olivia reviewed her mental list of expected passengers. Several CEOs, a retired school principal, a honeymooning couple. She had their faces memorized from the manifest. She trusted her instincts and her eye for detail. It was one of the reasons she rose to senior gate supervisor faster than anyone before her. Then a man stepped forward who did not match any of her expectations. He wore a worn black hoodie that hung loosely over soft, faded jeans. His boots were scuffed along the edges, the kind of wear caused by years of walking instead of replacing. He carried a small canvas backpack with a single frayed strap and a folded leather jacket tucked under one arm. No suitcase, no briefcase, no signs of business class confidence. He moved with a quiet, almost careful presence, as if he didn't want to disturb anyone around him. He offered Olivia a small, polite nod and held out his phone for scanning. Something inside her paused. This man did not belong in the first-class lane. Olivia lifted her eyes from the scanner and studied him for a brief moment. Years of experience had trained her to read passengers quickly. Business travelers held themselves differently. Frequent flyers had a rhythm to their movements. First-class passengers almost always carried the subtle assurance of people accustomed to comfort. But this man stood quietly, almost modestly, as though trying to blend into the background. His hoodie looked like something worn out of practicality instead of fashion, and the way he held his backpack suggested he had traveled light for a very long time. Passengers in the line behind him shifted impatiently, so Olivia returned to her task. She raised her professional smile, the one she had practiced in the mirror before every shift. Her voice stayed steady, warm but firm. "Sir, may I ask you to step aside for a moment? Economy boarding will begin shortly. First class is boarding now." The man blinked, not offended, not defensive. There was a softness in his expression, as if he understood why she assumed what she did. Phones began lifting discreetly around them. A few travelers whispered quietly, expecting a confrontation. But Olivia stood confident in her judgment. She had never misread a passenger manifest before. The man adjusted the strap of his backpack and gently extended his boarding pass. No frustration, No pushback, just a quiet offering of information. Olivia glanced at the screen. Seat 2A, first class. Her eyes narrowed slightly. She checked the name. At first, it didn't sink in. Then she read it again, slower. Keanu Charles Reeves. The name held weight, yet her brain resisted the conclusion. His clothes were too simple. His presence too understated. She had seen celebrities before, and they never traveled without a barrier of assistance or announcements. They never appeared like someone who had just walked in from a long night of thinking, wandering, or living a quiet life outside the spotlight. She looked up at him fully for the first time. Same calm expression, same unassuming stance. "Sir," she said, keeping her tone professional, "there may be a system error. One moment, please." He gave a gentle nod, not annoyed, not insistent, just accepting. "It is okay," he said softly. With that small sentence, he stepped out of the first-class lane and moved aside without protest. A ripple traveled through the room. The woman holding a latte in line murmured, "Did she just redirect him?" Someone further back lifted their phone higher for a better angle. A teenager whispered, "That's definitely him." Olivia didn't look at any of them. She focused on her podium, on the rules she trusted, on the belief that order kept chaos under control. She told herself the scan must have misread. The system must have duplicated a name. It had to be a coincidence. Behind her, the boarding screen glowed brightly with the words, "First class, boarding now." Ahead of her, the quiet man in the hoodie waited patiently, hands folded loosely around his worn backpack. And somehow, despite all her certainty, Olivia felt the first hint that something about this moment was different. For a long moment, Olivia stood behind the podium without moving, the boarding pass still glowing on her screen. She replayed the name in her mind, again and again. Keanu Charles Reeves. It didn't match anything she expected to see today. She could still picture the manifest she'd reviewed in the crew room. She had memorized every row, every note, every special request. Nowhere had she seen that name. It made no sense. Passengers continued shuffling forward, so she forced herself to resume scanning. Her hands worked out of habit, but her mind stayed locked on the quiet man standing a few steps away. She watched him in her peripheral vision each time. She lifted another boarding pass. He had stepped aside to clear the lane and now stood near the window, holding his backpack in both hands, calm and unbothered. Most people would have argued. Most would have demanded to know why they were being turned away. But he hadn't shown even a flicker of irritation. Olivia felt the unease grow. Another passenger passed through, then another. But the murmurs began circling the gate, like a low tide rising under her feet. People glanced between their phones, and the man in the hoodie, whispering names she didn't want to acknowledge. "It's him. Look at his face. Why is he in economy? He didn't even push back. That's so like him." She stiffened her posture and forced herself not to look. The rules she lived by said process came first. Assumptions were dangerous. You never trusted appearance alone. But something about this morning felt different. Her gut, usually her strongest tool, now felt strangely divided. The last, first-class passenger approached a woman in a pale pink sweater, wearing the kind of confidence Olivia expected in this lane. The woman lowered her voice as she leaned in. "I think that's Keanu Reeves," she murmured. "Are you sure he's not supposed to be here?" Olivia kept her tone even. "I'll verify everything." The woman nodded and walked toward the jet bridge, though she kept glancing back, as if she couldn't believe she had just boarded before him. When the line cleared, Olivia felt the weight of every watching eye. She stepped out from behind the podium and approached the man. The room tightened around her, phones already angled toward them. "Sir," she said carefully, "I'm going to recheck your reservation. There may have been some kind of duplication." He nodded once, gentle and accepting. Of course, no defensiveness, no surprise. no irritation. She returned to the podium, but before she could press a single key, someone behind her whispered, loud enough to snap the air in half. "That's Keanu Reeves." The murmurs turned into a wave. A teenager lifted his phone. A businessman straightened. A mother gasped softly. Someone stepped aside to get a clearer view. Olivia felt her breath catch. The man lifted his eyes toward her again, not demanding, not accusing, just quietly present. And in that one still moment between the rising cameras, the glow of the boarding screen, and the calm in his expression, Olivia understood something she couldn't take back. This wasn't a small mistake. This was the beginning of something much larger than a boarding error, something that would follow her far beyond Gate B12. At exactly 4:30 a.m., Olivia Park's alarm buzzed with a soft chime she had selected years ago. She never chose harsh alarms. Mornings, she believed, should begin with composure. She reached over and silenced it instantly. She had never hit the snooze button in her adult life. Snoozing, to her, meant falling behind before the day even began. Her tidy studio apartment reflected the same philosophy. Everything had its place. Her uniform hung on a padded hanger, ironed the night before until every seam lay smooth and sharp. Her shoes stood ready by the door, polished to a quiet shine. A single overhead light illuminated the room with a warm tone she preferred before sunrise. She believed mornings should be predictable, controlled, and free of decision fatigue. Before dressing, she reached for a small notebook on her nightstand. The cover was simple, black, slightly worn, and embossed with tiny silver letters that read, "Rules that keep things smooth." She opened to a fresh page and wrote a single line, something she added every morning, like a meditation. Today she wrote, "Start steady, stay steady." Her handwriting was neat, deliberate, and centered on the page. She closed the notebook with the same calm she wished to carry through her shift. As she dressed, she reviewed the roster she had memorized the night before. Today's flight was full. 12 first-class seats, all occupied. 2 pre-boarding passengers requiring mobility assistance. 1 musician traveling with a violin that needed safe handling. 1 veteran flagged for priority seating. She mentally assigned herself small reminders about each one, the way she always did. Details mattered. Remembering them made passengers feel cared for. By the time she stepped out the door, the city remained dark and quiet. The air was cool in that familiar San Francisco way, crisp enough to wake the senses. She locked the apartment behind her and walked with purpose toward her car. Every step of her morning routine had been refined through years of practice. She believed a structured start kept her grounded. Traffic was minimal at this hour. As she drove toward SFO, she hummed softly to the classical playlist she rotated weekly. The music helped her maintain a quiet mind. She reviewed today's gate number, flight number, and unusual notes. She remembered the name of the violinist. She remembered the veteran's seat. She remembered the family traveling with a toddler who would likely need a little extra assistance. Her ability to retain details was her greatest strength and the reason supervisors trusted her without hesitation. When she reached the staff parking lot, a familiar figure waved from the booth. It was Jonah, the lot attendant who had worked the morning shift for as long as she could remember. Jonah stepped out of the booth as Olivia pulled up. His reflective vest caught the glow of the overhead lights, and his face carried the easy warmth of someone who genuinely enjoyed greeting the early morning crew. Olivia rolled down her window, already smiling. "Morning, Olivia," he said, rubbing his hands together against the cold. "Morning, Jonah," she replied. "How's your son? Did you two hear anything back yet?" Jonah's expression lit up. "He got the scholarship. Full ride. He found out last night." Olivia felt genuine happiness brighten her chest. "That's incredible. You must be proud." He nodded, his smile widening. "I am. He worked so hard. I'll tell him you asked. Please do." she said. And congratulations again. She always remembered things like this: birthdays, graduations, anniversaries, small victories. She believed that order wasn't only about structure. It was also about noticing people, keeping track of the details that made them feel seen. She parked in her usual spot, third row, second space from the stairwell. She had chosen that location years ago and stuck with it because predictability saved time. As she crossed the lot, she secured her uniform blazer against a light gust of wind and walked briskly toward the staff entrance. Inside the airport, the smell of early morning coffee drifted across the polished floors, blending with the steady hum of cleaning machines. Olivia made her way through the staff corridors, her heels tapping with a rhythm she matched every day. She passed a few coworkers along the way, each offering a greeting. She returned every one of them with a nod and a smile, noting details without trying: a new hairstyle, an updated badge, a slight limp she didn't remember from yesterday. When she reached the crew room, she checked the clock. She was 10 minutes ahead of her usual schedule. She liked being early. Getting ahead prevented stress later. She placed her bag in her locker, touched the edge of her notebook for reassurance, and began her mental review of gate prep. First, she checked signage, gate numbers, boarding group markers, priority lines. Everything had to be aligned just right. Order calmed people before they even reached the podium. Then, she tested the overhead speakers to ensure announcements would be clear. She confirmed the jet bridge lights were functioning properly. She checked the emergency phone, she reviewed the pre-board list, and coordinated with the mobility team. Her fingers moved across her tablet screen with steady precision. Crew text threads confirmed the aircraft had arrived on time and was being cleaned. Catering had delivered on schedule. Maintenance had no outstanding notes on the equipment. Everything was on track. Olivia paused for a moment and took a quiet breath. This was the part of her job she loved most: the order, the clarity, the sense that everything was working the way it should. She whispered to herself, as she always did before a shift, "Order makes kindness possible." She believed that with her whole heart. Olivia stepped out toward gate B12 with a steady confidence she had built over an entire decade. The airport was waking up now, but before the rush arrived, she enjoyed a rare pocket of silence. The gate area sat empty except for a janitor wiping down rows of chairs and a distant echo of rolling suitcases. She used the quiet to finish her personal walkthrough. She adjusted each stanchion in the boarding lanes until the ropes hung evenly. She straightened the stack of safety pamphlets on the podium. She checked the boarding scanner twice, then once more, out of habit. Every detail mattered. She believed passengers could feel when a gate was prepared with care. It made them calmer. It made her job smoother. As she worked, she studied the flight manifest one more time. She reviewed seat numbers, special needs, and priority codings. Her eyes paused on the musician traveling with the violin. She made a mental note to offer early stow. She checked the veteran's name again, making sure his seat was near the aisle for easier movement. She pictured each passenger before they arrived. Her ability to read people wasn't arrogance, it was survival. It was her way of protecting the cabin from chaos before chaos even appeared. She didn't know yet that today would challenge every rule she lived by. By the time the clock struck the top of the hour, the gate area had shifted from early morning quiet to the soft rumble of passengers gathering in loose clusters. Olivia stood tall behind the podium, posture straight, uniform smooth, her mind already several steps ahead. She began her triple check, the ritual that kept everything running without friction. First were her pre-board passengers. She confirmed the wheelchair team was ready, then located the guest who needed extra time down the jet bridge. The mobility assistant arrived right on cue, and Olivia offered a grateful nod. Order was already holding. Next came families with small children. A father bounced a toddler on his hip while a mother pushed a stroller heavy with snacks and toys. Olivia scanned their passes with a warm, practiced tone and gestured toward the jet bridge. She reminded them where to fold the stroller and gave a quick tip about storing bottles for takeoff. The mother's shoulders relaxed at the kindness. Olivia liked moments like that. A small piece of calm offered before the long flight ahead. Then came the priority cabin. First class. This was when Olivia's instincts sharpened. She recognized the tech executive immediately, a man who had flown through her gate many times before. She handed him his preferred newspaper without being asked. He blinked with pleasant surprise, nodded his thanks, and stepped forward. Behind him came a retired school principal, wearing a string of pearls that reminded Olivia of her own grandmother. She greeted her by name and wished her a peaceful flight. The principal smiled, touched by the simple attention. Near the end of the line stood a young couple on their honeymoon, still carrying the soft glow of excitement. Olivia noticed the bride's hand trembling slightly with nerves, so she assured them that their seats included extra storage space and a meal accommodation that matched their notes. Relief washed over their faces as they joined the boarding stream. Everything was running exactly as it should, organized, predictable, smooth. Then Olivia's gaze shifted toward the growing economy line, and something different caught her attention. A girl around 13 stood beside her mother, holding a violin case tightly to her chest. Her curls were pulled back neatly, though a few strands had escaped, framing her determined expression. Her name on the manifest flashed through Olivia's memory. Maya Delgado. Traveling with her mother, Elena. Maya cradled the case as if it were fragile or precious, and in her other hand she carried a manila folder stuffed with sheet music. They whispered quietly, their voices too low to catch, but the urgency in their expression said everything. An audition. New York. High stakes. Olivia made a mental note immediately. The violin would need safe storage. The girl would likely need reassurance. Her mother looked exhausted, her scrub still carrying the scent of night shift work. Olivia would keep an eye on them. And then, just as she turned back toward the first-class lane, she saw him. He appeared in the first-class lane as quietly as a shadow slipping into place. No fanfare, no hurried steps, no impatience. Just a man in a worn black hoodie, soft jeans that had clearly lived a long life, and boots with scuffs along the edges that told a story of countless miles. He carried only 2 items: a small canvas backpack with a frayed strap, and a folded leather jacket resting over his arm. No suitcase, no designer luggage, nothing that matched the normal rhythm of first-class boarding. Olivia felt her internal alarms flicker to life. She had seen this before. Passengers wandering into the wrong lane. Passengers trying their luck with confident strides. Passengers assuming no one would question them. Her instincts sharpened with that familiar sense of responsibility. She protected the line. She protected the order. The man stepped forward, offering a small, polite nod. His movements were slow and respectful, as if he didn't want to disturb anyone around him. Yet something about the simplicity of his appearance made Olivia brace herself. This didn't match the manifest she knew by heart. And after years in this role, she trusted her sense of who belonged in which lane. "Good morning," she said with her practiced professional tone, the one soft enough to stay warm, but firm enough to maintain authority. "First class is boarding at this time. May I see your boarding pass?" He handed it to her calmly, his eyes steady and gentle. Olivia scanned it with quick precision. The screen flashed, Seat 2A, first class. But the name made her pause again, just as it had earlier. Keanu Charles Reeves. Her mind rejected the conclusion on instinct. The clothes were too modest, the demeanor too quiet, the lack of baggage too unusual. She lifted her eyes again, studying his face more fully. There was something familiar about it, something recognizable beyond the simplicity of his appearance. But she didn't allow herself to assume. Assumptions caused errors. She believed in process. "I think there may be a system error," she said, keeping her tone steady. "Let me direct you to the economy lane while I verify this." Phones began to rise around them almost immediately. Travelers sensed tension even before it became clear. Some leaned subtly into the aisle to watch. Some lifted their cameras as if waiting for conflict. But the man simply nodded, accepting her decision without the slightest resistance. "It is okay," he replied softly. Then he stepped aside, letting the next passenger through. Olivia expected frustration. She expected questioning. She expected at least some attempt to explain. But his acceptance was almost disarming. It created a moment of stillness that felt out of place in the hurried rhythm of boarding. Yet she stayed focused. Her job was to enforce order. She redirected her attention to the next passenger and reminded herself that the manifest would confirm everything. But her sixth sense continued to pulse with quiet warning. This moment was not over. Olivia returned to scanning passes, but the atmosphere around the gate had shifted. The steady rhythm of boarding, once predictable and calm, now carried an undercurrent she couldn't name. She heard low whispers rising behind her like a quiet tide. Someone murmured, "That looked like him." Someone else said, "No way. He's in first class alone." Even with her back partially turned, she felt dozens of eyes flicking between her podium and the man now standing several feet away. He didn't seem bothered by any of it. He held his backpack loosely, gaze lowered toward the window where streaks of morning sunlight began to stretch across the tarmac. He looked peaceful, almost meditative, as if the commotion around him wasn't meant for him at all. That calm unnerved Olivia more than an argument would have. Most people challenged redirection. Most resisted when told they weren't where they were supposed to be, but not him. His willingness to step aside so easily made the situation more confusing, not less. Olivia forced herself to return to the process. Her job depended on it. She scanned the next handful of passengers with steady efficiency, greeting each by name, offering small, thoughtful phrases she'd memorized long ago. A frequent flyer thanked her. A young mother gave a grateful smile. A man in a business suit nodded her way with polite recognition. Each interaction steadied her, reminding her that she knew this job. She excelled at it. She read passengers accurately. She maintained order. But then came another whisper, louder. This time, "I'm telling you, that is Keanu Reeves." The name cracked through the gate, like a sudden drop in cabin pressure. Olivia's throat tightened, though her expression remained professional. She refused to turn around. She refused to respond to the tension rising behind her. She told herself that the name on the boarding pass must have been a duplicate. People shared names all the time. The world was full of coincidences. And Keanu Reeves would never be traveling alone in a hoodie, much less without an assistant or security detail. That wasn't how celebrities move through airports. She had processed enough VIP travelers to know their patterns. Still, the whispers grew. A teenager near the back lifted his phone higher, angling for a better look. A woman in a scarf covered her mouth with excitement. A man with a coffee cup leaned over the rope divider, trying to confirm the face he had glimpsed. Each reaction added weight to the air, tightening the space around the podium. Finally, Olivia signaled the last priority passenger through. The early boarding groups were completed. Economy boarding was minutes away. She took a breath, smoothed the front of her blazer, and reminded herself that clarity came from action. She needed to resolve this before it spiraled further. She stepped out from behind the podium and approached the man once more. Every movement around her seemed to pause. Passengers straightened. Phones angled upward. Even the cleaning staff paused mid-step. "Sir," she said gently, "I want to verify your reservation again before we continue boarding." He nodded without hesitation, meeting her eyes with quiet understanding. Of course, there was no resentment in his tone. No impatience, just an easy acceptance that most passengers didn't display even in straightforward situations. Olivia felt the back of her neck warm under the growing number of eyes watching them. She returned to the podium, but before she could touch the keyboard, another voice cut through the silence. A woman near the stanchions said it out loud, with full certainty. "That is definitely Keanu Reeves." A ripple of reactions followed instantly. Gasps, quiet laughs of disbelief, the scrape of a suitcase, as someone stood suddenly taller. Dozens of heads turned, pushing the air thick with curiosity. Olivia froze. The man looked up from where he stood by the window, his expression unchanged. Calm, patient, almost gentle. And in that moment, Olivia knew with complete clarity that her morning had slipped beyond anything she had planned for. The rules she trusted, the instincts she relied on, everything she believed she understood about passengers and patterns and order. It was all about to be tested. What she had done would not stay inside the walls of Gate B12. Something larger had already begun unwinding itself, drawn by a single quiet moment, a simple decision, and a man who never once raised his voice. Olivia straightened her blazer once more, realizing this was the moment her day, and perhaps her understanding of her job, stopped being routine. This was the beginning of everything that came next. The moment Olivia stepped back behind her podium, the quiet man in the black hoodie lifted his backpack strap, gave her a small nod of understanding, and began walking toward the economy lane. His movements were unhurried, almost gentle, as though he wanted to avoid disturbing the tense air still hanging around Gate B12. A young couple juggling a toddler approached the switchback, looking frazzled and unsure of how to merge. Without hesitation, the man gestured for them to go ahead of him, offering a warm smile that eased the strain on their tired faces. From the side of the gate, a bystander positioned near the jet bridge entrance held up her phone, recording the entire interaction. The angle captured everything: his quiet acceptance, the toddler waving back at him, the calm way he stepped out of the spotlight rather than into it. Another traveler muttered that the man looked familiar. Someone else whispered that it had to be him. But the debate continued in hushed tones full of uncertainty. On social media, the clip went up within seconds. The caption read, "Keanu Reeves turned away from first class?" The comments came immediately, a mix of disbelief and certainty. One person wrote, "He would never correct her. That's exactly how he is." Another insisted, "Look at the backpack. He's had that same style for years." Others argued the opposite, saying the clothes were too worn, that celebrities did not travel without teams or bodyguards, that this must be a look-alike. But the video continued spreading, and the comments grew louder with each second. At the gate podium, Olivia remained unaware of the growing storm online. She received a ping from operations about a full roll-aboard bin in first class and began preparing for a quick announcement. Her focus remained locked on the logistics in front of her. She double-checked the pre-board list, organized the next set of boarding groups, and readjusted the boarding passes stacked neatly beside her. Scanner. She had no idea that her earlier decision had already reached thousands of people. Her world remained narrowed to the task at hand. Meanwhile, as the economy lane began to move forward, the man in the hoodie entered the jet bridge with the quiet couple and their toddler. Inside the long metal tunnel, he paused to help an elderly man struggling with a heavy duffel bag. He lifted it easily, placed it securely in the overhead compartment, then stepped back, as if the action were nothing unusual. He didn't make a show of it. He didn't wait for thanks. He simply turned to ensure the older man was comfortable before returning to his seat assignment. A few rows later, he noticed a husband and wife, separated by a row of passengers. Without hesitation, he offered to swap seats with the husband, gently asking if they preferred to sit together. The man accepted gratefully, relief softening his expression. The quiet traveler nodded once, slid into the new seat, and settled in. He asked for nothing in return. He stayed curious, willing to help, yet stayed out of the spotlight as if he had spent his entire life learning how not to draw attention, even when surrounded by it. Inside the aircraft, the early stirrings of boarding blended with quiet conversations and the shuffle of feet across the aisle. The man in the hoodie found his newly exchanged seat and placed his canvas backpack carefully at his feet. He took a moment to observe the cabin rather than settle in immediately. His eyes moved with a gentle curiosity, noticing the passengers around him, noticing who seemed stressed, who seemed hurried, who seemed lost. It was a habit formed over years of moving through the world without wanting to disrupt it. Across the aisle, the elderly man he'd helped earlier kept glancing toward him with a grateful expression that grew each time their eyes met. The man nodded politely in return, offering a small, reassuring smile that made the older passenger relax against his headrest. A flight attendant passed by with a tray of water bottles, and the man declined with a soft thank you, folding his hands together in his lap. He didn't ask for special treatment. He didn't expect it. His posture held the quiet ease of someone who knew how to fit into any space without asking it to make room for him. The husband and wife he had reunited were now whispering together, relieved and grateful. The wife placed her hand over her heart, watching him for a moment, before leaning toward her husband to say something he couldn't hear. The gratitude in her eyes was unmistakable. Outside the plane, the murmurs at Gate B12 continued to grow. A teenager replayed the short video on his phone for a group of curious passengers. Someone zoomed in on the man's profile, comparing it to photos online. A woman laughed nervously and muttered that only Keanu Reeves would look that calm after being turned away from first class. Another insisted it couldn't be him because no celebrity would ever let themselves be directed down the economy lane without a single objection. But the video kept gaining views. Every second added more comments, more speculation, more disbelief. At the podium, Olivia stayed focused on her tasks. She triple-checked the zoning announcements, updated the overhead display, and ensured the next boarding group was ready. She hadn't looked at her phone since the start of her shift. To her, this was just another morning, another flight, another line of passengers needing order and guidance. She still believed she had made a simple judgment call, one grounded in experience, not prejudice. She wasn't aware that strangers across the country were now dissecting her decision, trying to determine whether she had recognized the man or not. Back in the aircraft, the man in the hoodie leaned slightly into the aisle to allow a mother with 2 small children to squeeze past. He offered a brief smile to each of the kids, soft enough to avoid, startling them but warm enough to ease their tension. One child waved back without hesitation. He returned the wave with the same gentle calm he had shown at the gate. And still, he asked for nothing. Back at the gate, Olivia continued moving through her checklist, unaware that the quiet moment she'd witnessed earlier was now unfolding across social media feeds. She received another operations message, confirming that the aircraft doors would close soon and that she should begin final boarding. She adjusted the stanchions one last time, called for the next group, and guided passengers forward with her usual collected voice. As the remaining travelers filed down the jet bridge, more eyes drifted toward the video, still playing on phones. People watched the clip again and again, trying to decide whether the man in the hoodie was really who they suspected. Olivia caught none of it. She kept her gaze on the scanner, on the boarding order, on the process that had always anchored her. Inside the aircraft, the man who had accepted the redirect without a flicker of irritation slipped quietly into the rhythm of the cabin. No demands, no entitlement. When a nervous young traveler struggled to make room for a backpack in the overhead bin, he rose, lifted the bag with ease, and tucked it neatly into place. The traveler thanked him shyly. He responded only with a warm smile before returning to his seat. Nothing about his presence called for attention. Yet somehow, everyone around him felt drawn to it. Row 24 was already half full when the man in the worn hoodie stepped into the aisle. The hum of settling passengers mixed with the clatter of overhead bins and the muffled voices of families arranging themselves for the long flight. He paused when he reached his assigned row, noticing the girl seated at the window. Her violin case held tight against her chest, as though she feared it might vanish if she loosened her grip even slightly. Maya Delgado didn't look up at first. Her curls were pulled back into a neat tie, but loose strands clung to her cheeks from the long walk through the airport. She looked exhausted, nervous, and too aware of every bump, shift, and sound around her. Her mother, Elena, sat in the middle seat, one hand resting lightly on Maya's arm in silent reassurance. The man gave them both a small, warm smile before sliding into the aisle seat. He noticed immediately the way Maya's fingers curled protectively around the violin case. Not defensive, not possessive, just afraid. As if she was holding the most fragile part of her world. He glanced at Elena, who offered a polite nod. He returned it gently, before turning his attention back to Maya. "That's a beautiful case," he said softly. "Looks like it's traveled a lot of miles with you." Maya blinked, startled. She looked at him, then down at the scuffed edges of the case. The wear was visible, especially near the handle and around the top curve. Marks left by school bus floors, practice room chairs, and late-night rehearsals. "It's old," she whispered. "I've had it since I was 8. The man smiled. "Those marks aren't flaws. They look like the kind of scuffs people earn from working hard at something they love." He pointed gently toward the worn edge. "That one right there looks like it came from a tight rehearsal space." Maya flushed with a small shy laugh. "It did. I bumped it against a stand last semester." He nodded knowingly. "Happens to the best players." Her shoulders relaxed, just a little. But the worry in her eyes didn't fade completely. She clutched the case closer and lowered her voice. "I'm just scared something will happen to it. The overhead bins get so full, and the bridge has a tiny crack. I'm supposed to audition tomorrow." She swallowed hard. "I can't afford to fix it before then." The man listened with full attention, his posture calm and open. He glanced toward the case again, then back at Maya. "Would it be all right?" he asked gently. "If I take a look at the bridge? Only if you're comfortable with it." Maya hesitated. Then, slowly, she nodded. Maya carefully unlatched the violin case, her fingers trembling slightly as she lifted the lid. The velvet interior looked well cared for, though the fabric had thinned in places from years of use. The man leaned in, but he kept his hands respectfully still, waiting for her to take the instrument out herself. When she did, she held it with a blend of pride and fear, as if the violin were both her greatest treasure and her greatest responsibility. She angled it toward him, pointing to a narrow line near the top of the bridge. "It's right there," she said. "I noticed it 2 nights ago. My bow rosin is almost gone too. I didn't have time to get more before the flight." He studied the bridge with genuine care, his eyes patient and focused. "You're right. It's a hairline crack, but it hasn't spread. You treated it gently." He looked up at her. "That means you're already doing the right thing." Relief softened Maya's expression. "It's just, the conservatory judges notice everything." He nodded. "They do. But they also notice heart. They notice preparation. You've clearly been putting in the work." He paused, then added softly, "If the bridge worries you, I can talk to a flight attendant about storing it in the closet. It'll be safer from pressure and shifting bags." Elena's eyebrows rose. "Would they really do that?" "It depends on the plane," he said kindly, "but it's worth asking. Instruments like this should be protected." Maya looked at him, uncertainty flickering across her face. "Would you really ask? I don't want to bother anyone." "It's never a bother to protect something important," he said gently. "And you're not asking for anything unreasonable." Her grip on the violin loosened just a little. He held out his hand slightly. "May I?" he asked again, careful with his tone, offering her every chance to decline. Maya took a slow breath, then placed the violin into his hands. He held it like it was something sacred, not like a collector, not like a musician showing off, but like someone who understood that instruments held stories inside them, stories etched into every tiny scratch and faded corner. He examined the bridge again, never forcing a gesture or rushing her through the moment. When he handed it back, he did so with the same quiet respect. A soft cloth tucked in the corner of the case helps reduce vibration during takeoff and landing, he said. It won't fix the crack, but it can keep it from getting worse. Maya's eyes widened. I didn't know that. A small tip I picked up over the years, he replied, smiling softly. Elena watched the exchange with growing warmth, recognizing something in the man's conduct. Patience, humility, a calm steadiness that made the world feel less chaotic. He didn't ask about the audition. He waited for Maya to share on her own. And she did. Maya rested the violin carefully across her lap, the instrument now feeling a little less like a fragile burden and more like something she could protect. She looked at the man with a mixture of relief and shy gratitude. Thank you, she whispered. I've been so scared something would happen before the audition. He nodded gently. Nerves mean you care. Caring is good. It makes you precise. Maya exhaled slowly, her shoulders settling. Elena gave her daughter's hand a squeeze before turning to the man. She's been practicing for months, every night after my shift. Her voice had the softness of someone tired but deeply proud. He smiled at both of them, then glanced up toward the call button above his seat. Let's see if we can get you two a little extra help before we land. He pressed the button with a light tap. A soft chime echoed overhead. When the nearest flight attendant approached, the man spoke quietly enough not to draw attention. Hi, would it be possible to get some water for Maya here? And if there's a small space in the front closet for her violin, it would mean a lot. The bridge has a minor crack, and overhead bins can be rough. The flight attendant glanced at the violin, then at the man, then at Maya's anxious expression. Her demeanor softened instantly. Of course. Let me check the closet space. We'll take care of. Maya's relief came so quickly, her breath nearly caught. The man added, if there's a quiet spot, she can stretch her hands before landing, even just a minute or two. That would help her relax. The attendant nodded. I'll arrange something. As she walked away, Maya stared at him, eyes shimmering. Why are you being so kind? He shook his head softly. You're chasing something brave. People should feel supported when they do that. In the hum of row 24, something shifted. Maya's fear eased. Elena's exhaustion lifted. The man's presence, quiet and steady, strengthened their small row like an anchor in a restless sea. Olivia stood at her terminal in the forward galley, reviewing the seating chart one last time before beginning water service in economy. The hum of the aircraft settled into the familiar rhythm she trusted. The gentle shake of turbulence eased, the overhead lights dimmed, and the cabin felt almost peaceful. She took in a slow breath, grounding herself in the routine she knew better than anything else. Then her screen blinked. A notification popped across the top. A new message from a colleague. Just a short line. Is this your gate? Olivia frowned, confused. She tapped the link. A video loaded immediately, a 20-second clip shot from the side of gate B12. Her own voice played through the audio. Her own face appeared, composed and polite, telling a man in a worn black hoodie that he was heading the wrong way. Then the angle shifted, and the camera caught him stepping back without protest, waving the couple with the toddler ahead. The caption on the video read, Gate Agent sends Keanu Reeves to economy. He didn't even argue. The comments were already pouring in by the hundreds. Some were confused, some sympathetic, some harsh. One wrote, "He's too polite. That's how you know it's really him." Another said, "She didn't even recognize him." A few added clips from different angles, and the video kept growing, climbing onto more feeds, more conversations, more speculation. Olivia felt the ground shift beneath her. Her throat tightened as she replayed the moment in her mind. She remembered the hoodie, the scuffed backpack, the tired but calm expression on his face. She remembered her tone, the exact words she chose, the posture she held. She remembered how certain she had been that she was protecting order at the gate. Now, seeing the clip from the outside, she felt exposed. Not because of who he was, but because she wondered whether she had missed something essential. She steadied her breathing. She reminded herself of the musician's pre-board note. She had been following procedure. She had been doing her job. And the plane still needed service. People still needed water. There were passengers depending on her to keep everything moving smoothly. She closed the clip, straightened her blazer, and lifted the tray. As she walked into economy, she scanned the rows automatically. Families, students, the elderly man she had seen earlier. Then, row 24 Maya, and the violin case she'd noted during boarding, and the man beside her, his calm posture. The quiet way he looked up when she approached. He smiled gently. "Thank you, Olivia," he said, reading her name from her badge. Hearing her name from him froze Olivia for a second. Not because she felt recognized in any personal way, but because his tone carried no resentment at all. He spoke her name as though it belonged in the moment, steady and respectful, as if nothing about their earlier interaction had unsettled him. She forced her breath to stay even, and offered him the practiced smile that had carried her through a decade of long flights. "Can I get you anything to drink?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. He nodded toward Maya first. "Water for her, please, if that's all right." Maya looked up shyly, still holding her violin case, though her grip had loosened since earlier. Her mother, Elena, gave a tired smile of gratitude. Olivia poured a cup carefully, passing it to the girl with a gentle nod. Then the man in the hoodie glanced toward the overhead bins, his voice low but clear. "If it's possible, do you have a safe place for her violin? Maybe the crew closet? The bridge has a small crack, and the overhead pressure might make it worse." He spoke calmly, not as a demand, not as a celebrity expecting favors, but as someone advocating for a nervous young musician whose future depended on a delicate piece of carved wood. Olivia blinked. The request was thoughtful, protective, even. Not once had he mentioned himself, his seat, or the earlier mix-up. He cared only about the violin, about the girl holding it, about making sure she reached her audition with her instrument intact. "Let me take a look," Olivia said softly. When she held out her hands, Maya hesitated, glancing at the man. He gave her a reassuring nod. Only then did she hand the case over. Olivia opened it with careful fingers, noticing the wear on the velvet interior, the hand-stitched cloth tucked near the neck, the faint stress line in the bridge. She recognized the seriousness of the issue immediately. For a musician traveling to an audition, a cracked bridge felt like a cracked future. "I'll keep it safe," Olivia promised. Maya nodded, though her eyes stayed on the case until it left her lap. As Olivia stepped into the aisle with the violin, she heard the quiet murmur of nearby passengers. A young man in the opposite row leaned toward his friend and whispered, "That really is him." His friend whispered back, "Yeah, but he looks like he belongs here." Neither spoke with ridicule. Neither sounded surprised in a mocking way. Their voices held something else: respect, a kind of quiet awe at the way he fit so naturally among everyone, helping, listening, blending without dismissing himself or others. Olivia walked toward the galley with the violin in her hands. The weight felt delicate, and the truth settling in her chest felt heavier. She had not recognized him, but now she recognized something deeper. Olivia reached the forward galley and opened the narrow crew closet, gently placing Maya's violin inside. She secured the latch and added a small cushion of folded linens to prevent vibration during the flight. When she closed the door, she paused, letting her hands rest on the handle for a moment as she gathered her breath. She replayed the clip in her mind again. The angle, the comments, the speculation, the softness with which he had stepped aside, the certainty in her own voice as she redirected for him to the economy lane, convinced she was preserving order at the gate. She remembered how proud she had felt of her pattern recognition, her ability to read passengers at a glance. Now, the certainty felt fragile. Not wrong, not cruel, but incomplete. She exhaled slowly, then carried the empty tray back toward row 24. The cabin was quieter now. Passengers were settling in, adjusting seat belts, opening books, unwinding earbuds. She placed a refill of water on the cart and moved through the aisle with steady steps. When she reached Maya again, the girl looked up with anxious hope. "Is it safe?" she asked. Olivia nodded. "It's in the closet, perfectly secure." Maya's shoulders softened. Elena thanked her quietly, the gratitude in her voice unmistakable. The man in the hoodie gave Olivia a small nod of thanks. Nothing grand, nothing performative, just a gentle acknowledgement that reached deeper than any apology or explanation. "Thank you for helping her," he said. Olivia swallowed, unsure what to say. She could not bring herself to address the video. Not yet. She simply nodded and stepped back into the aisle. As she made her way toward the galley once more, she heard a soft voice from behind her. "See? He's exactly like people say." Another replied, "Yeah, he doesn't act above anyone, not even a little." Their words lingered long after she returned to her station. For the first time in years, Olivia questioned whether her rules, her perfect, reliable rules, had kept her prepared or had kept her from seeing what mattered most. A soft tremor ran through the cabin, the kind of gentle turbulence that made drink cups quiver and seatbelts tug lightly against hips. The lights overhead flickered once in response before settling back into their steady glow. Passengers shifted, adjusting postures and tightening straps. A few anxious glances bounced around the rows. But row 24 remained strangely calm. The man in the hoodie turned toward Maya with a reassuring smile. "Nothing to worry about," he said softly. "Happens all the time. Think of it like a small wave under a boat." His tone was steady, and the warmth in his voice carried more reassurance than the announcement that followed from the cockpit. Maya gave a small, nervous laugh. "It always makes my hands shake." He nodded. "Most musicians get that way. Want me to show you something that helps?" Without waiting for her to feel embarrassed, he demonstrated a simple stretch, pressing fingertips together lightly, then opening the palms like a blooming flower. "Do it slowly," he added. "It keeps the joints loose, so the bow hand stays steady." Maya copied the motion, her shoulders easing with each gentle stretch. Elena watched with quiet gratitude, the exhaustion in her eyes softening. The man reached into his backpack and pulled out a small case of earplugs. "These help if the cabin noise gets overwhelming," he said, offering a spare pair to Maya. "They won't block out everything, just enough to keep your focus." She accepted them with a shy thank you, slipping them into her hand like they were something precious. Across the aisle, the elderly man shifted uncomfortably, wincing as he tried to stretch his legs. The man in the hoodie leaned toward him slightly. "Is the air vent too strong?" he asked. "Sometimes the cold makes muscles ache more." The older man blinked, surprised anyone had noticed. "Maybe just a little," he murmured. "May I?" the man asked. The old man nodded, and the man in the hoodie reached up to adjust the vent, redirecting the airflow so it wouldn't blow directly onto him. The gesture was small, but the relief on the older man's face was immediate. A moment later, footsteps approached from the front of the cabin. A sharply dressed passenger from first class appeared, wearing a blazer that didn't quite belong in economy. He scanned the rows, squinting. When his gaze landed on the man in the hoodie, he froze. "Wait, are you?" he began, lowering his voice as if the words might break something sacred. The man in the hoodie only smiled.
gentle and calm, as if inviting the question. The first-class passenger stood rigid for a moment, torn between excitement and uncertainty.
His eyes flicked from the man in the hoodie to Maya, then to Elena, then back again. He lowered his voice even further, leaning slightly into the aisle. "Sorry to bother you," he whispered. "But are you Keanu Reeves?" The man in the hoodie kept his expression soft and humble. "Just traveling," he replied gently, neither confirming nor denying outright. The passenger's eyes widened anyway. It was enough. An awkward silence stretched between them for a heartbeat, until the man blurted, "Do you want my seat? Actually, take it. Please. I didn't know I didn't realize." Several nearby passengers looked up, startled. Maya blinked. Elena stiffened in surprise. The elderly man across the aisle watched with curious eyes. Keanu shook his head, still calm. "I'm all right here," he said. "Thank you, though." The first-class passenger blinked rapidly, as if trying to compute a response he hadn't rehearsed. "Are you sure? It's 2A. Lots of legroom. Quiet. You deserve." Keanu raised a gentle hand, stopping him with warmth rather than force. "I appreciate it. But if you really want to help, maybe offer your seat to someone who needs the space more." The passenger hesitated. "Someone who needs it?" Keanu nodded toward the elderly man across the aisle. "He's been trying to stretch his legs since takeoff." Then he gestured toward Maya and Elena. "Or maybe them. Her violin is fragile, and long flights aren't easy when you're carrying something that important." The passenger followed Keanu's gaze, taking in each person with fresh eyes. The elderly man trying to subtly ease his cramped knees. Maya sitting stiffly, hands curled around her borrowed earplugs. Elena, weary from back-to-back shifts, offering her daughter every ounce of energy she had left. Something shifted in the first-class passenger's face. His posture softened. His expression changed. It was as though he saw the cabin differently. Now, less as a hierarchy of seats, and more as a community of travelers, each carrying their own weight. "I never thought about it like that," he muttered. Keanu gave a reassuring nod. "It'll make someone's day." The man inhaled deeply, nodding to himself with new conviction. "All right," he said. "All right, I'll do it." Then he turned and made his way back toward the front of the cabin with a steadiness that hadn't been there before. Maya looked up at Keanu, bewildered. "Are people always like that around you?" Keanu smiled softly. "People usually just need permission to be kind." A few minutes later, the first-class passenger returned with a flight attendant beside him. His voice was steadier now, almost proud. "Sir," he said to the elderly man, "I'd like to offer you my seat in first class. You'll be more comfortable there." The older man blinked in disbelief. "Are you sure?" "I am," the passenger replied. "Please, take it." A ripple of surprise moved through the cabin. Olivia, walking down the aisle with a tray, paused as the moment unfolded. She exchanged a quick glance with the attendant, then stepped forward to coordinate the swap. She guided the elderly man toward the front, steadying his hand as he rose. Soft applause broke out from a few rows. Then more joined in. It wasn't loud, but it carried a warmth that changed the tone of the entire flight. Maya smiled openly for the first time since boarding. Elena's eyes glistened. The first-class passenger looked relieved, almost lighter, as if he had discovered something new about himself. Keanu simply nodded in quiet approval. Farther back in the cabin, a passenger raised their phone to record the scene. Not for spectacle, but for the joy of witnessing something rare. On-screen prompt for viewers. If small acts of dignity matter to you, tap like and subscribe for more stories of quiet kindness. The cabin settled into a quieter rhythm after the seat swap, as though the small moment of generosity had shifted the air itself. Passengers relaxed back into their seats. Conversation softened, and even the hum of the engines felt gentler. Olivia walked slowly down the aisle, double-checking that every seatbelt was fastened and that the aircraft had regained its calm. In row 24, Maya sat straighter than before. Her hands no longer trembled, and her eyes had grown brighter with a cautious sense of hope. She kept glancing toward the front closet where her violin was safely stored. Each time the closet door came into view, she exhaled with visible relief. When Olivia reached her row again, Maya looked up. Excuse me," she said softly. "Is there a place where I can just pluck a few notes?" "Not loud. I just need to test if the bridge is still stable." Olivia paused, taking in the earnestness in Maya's voice. The girl was trying to be respectful, trying not to disturb anyone, trying to protect the one thing she needed for her audition. Something about that mixture of bravery and hesitation made Olivia's heart tighten. "There's a small vestibule near the galley," Olivia replied. "It's not silent, but it's quieter than here. If you keep the sound gentle, you can test it." Maya's face brightened. "Really? I'll be very quiet." "I know you will. Come with me." Elena gave her daughter a nod of encouragement, and Maya unlatched her seatbelt. She looked back at the man in the hoodie before standing. "Is that okay?" she asked him gently, as though needing permission from someone who understood the stakes. "Go ahead," he said warmly. "You'll feel better once you know it's holding." Maya followed Olivia toward the galley. When they reached the small vestibule, Olivia retrieved the case from the closet and handed it to her with both hands. Maya opened it carefully, took out the violin, and held it close to her ear. She plucked a single string so soft it was barely more than a whisper. The note vibrated gently through the hollow wood. She plucked another, then one more. Each quiet sound echoed with her own relief. "It's okay," she murmured. "It's holding." Olivia felt something warm settle in her chest. Back in row 24, the man in the hoodie watched the galley with the calm focus of someone who cared deeply about the outcome, though he made no move to follow. Instead, he turned to the passing flight attendant and asked quietly, "Do you think the airline could make it easier for musicians to board early? Instruments like hers are fragile. Early stow keeps them safe." He phrased it as a gentle question, not a criticism, not a request for himself, a suggestion to help strangers he would likely never see again. The attendant nodded thoughtfully. "That's a really good idea." While Maya tested her violin in the small vestibule, the cabin continued shifting into a gentler, more connected rhythm. Conversations carried a different tone, now less impatient, less weary. Passengers who had barely acknowledged each other earlier were exchanging small smiles, nodding across aisles, and watching the girl at the front with soft curiosity. It felt as though a single thread of kindness had woven itself through the rows. Olivia stood near the galley, arms relaxed at her sides as she waited patiently for Maya to finish. She kept her posture calm, though her mind churned with the earlier notification. The clip of her at the gate, the comments flooding in, the sudden knowledge that people outside the aircraft were now dissecting her smallest gesture had all pressed at the edges of her focus. But every time she looked at Maya, carefully plucking her instrument with trembling hope, the noise in her head quieted again. Behind her, the curtain to first class rustled. The same passenger who had filmed the gate moment, the blogger and designer, athleisure, stepped into the galley area. She clutched her phone in one hand, the screen glowing with notifications. Her expression had changed since earlier. Less smug, less self-assured. Something in her eyes resembled apology. She hesitated, then whispered to Olivia, "I posted the video from the gate. It's going crazy." She swallowed, looking almost ashamed. "But I just uploaded another one. Something about him giving up his seat. People are calling it the most wholesome thing they've seen all day." Olivia stiffened, unsure how to respond. She didn't trust her voice yet, so she nodded politely, keeping her face neutral. The blogger shifted her weight. People aren't mocking anymore. They're admiring him. She glanced toward row 24. "He didn't want credit. I could tell," Olivia said quietly. "He didn't ask for anything. No,
the blogger agreed softly. He didn't. She stepped back through the curtain, her expression far more contemplative than before. Olivia turned her attention back to the small vestibule. Maya stopped plucking long enough to whisper, "It's good. It's holding. I can actually play tomorrow." Olivia offered her a gentle smile. "You're going to do great." Maya closed her case carefully and hugged it to her chest. When she looked up, her eyes were bright with gratitude. Gratitude for the space, for the chance to breathe, for the simple opportunity to check the instrument that carried all her dreams. They walked back to row 24 together, the cabin quieting as Maya approached her seat. Elena reached out to squeeze her daughter's hand. The man in the hoodie looked at her with a reassuring nod, as though the sound check had been a small victory they all shared. For the first time since the video surfaced, Olivia felt something loosen in her chest. And then her terminal pinged. Olivia reached the forward galley just as her handheld terminal vibrated again. She glanced at the pet screen, expecting a routine update. Instead, a short message from operations appeared in stark black text. "Maintain standard service. Do not comment. Media will be present at arrival." She read them twice, then a third time, as if they might rearrange themselves into something less alarming. Media at arrival meant the situation had already reached far beyond a simple misunderstanding. Whatever the world thought happened at Gate B12 was now bigger than her shift, bigger than one interaction, bigger than anything she had anticipated. She closed the terminal slowly. Behind her, Maya returned to her seat with her violin, visibly calmer. Passengers watched her with soft smiles, admiration replacing earlier curiosity. In first class, the blogger's newest post spread with rapid-fire comments. He gave his seat to strangers. Respect. This is the kind of story we need. The mood throughout the cabin shifted, again, lighter and warmer than before. Olivia stood quietly for a moment, listening to the hum of the aircraft, feeling the weight of the message settle into her chest. Something was building. Something she could no longer control. A soft tremor rolled through the cabin again, the kind that nudged water cups and made overhead panels click gently against their latches. This time, the turbulence wasn't sharp or unsettling, just enough for passengers to shift in their seats and glance instinctively toward the aisle. In row 24, Maya tightened her grip on her violin case before realizing the instrument was safely cushioned by the galley closet. Her hands twitched with the impulse to check on it. But before anxiety could settle in, the man in the hoodie leaned toward her with the same steady calm he had offered all morning. "Try an open string," he said softly. "Just one, slow and easy. It'll help you feel if the bridge is holding." She blinked in surprise. "Here? With everyone around?" "It doesn't have to be loud," he replied. "Just enough for you to hear your instrument breathe." She hesitated, then nodded. Olivia, standing in the galley, saw Maya step forward into the narrow vestibule, again violin tucked beneath her chin. The girl plucked a single open string, almost feather-light. The note quivered through the air, soft but warm, delicate but whole. It drifted into the cabin like a gentle ribbon of sound. The turbulence faded. Passengers looked up. A few smiled. The baby 2 rows behind stopped crying mid-sob, eyes widening as if the note had reached some quiet place only children understood. Even the older man across the aisle leaned forward slightly, as though listening brought him back to something he once loved. "Now a G scale," the man in the hoodie murmured. Maya exhaled and played the notes slowly, each tone rising and falling with care. They were not perfect, not polished, but they carried sincerity, the sound of someone fighting through fear to find her footing again. The cabin breathed with her. When she finished, she lowered the violin with a shy, almost disbelieving smile. "It sounds okay," she whispered. "It sounds like you're ready," he answered. Olivia watched from the galley, feeling a strange warmth spread across her chest. She wasn't the only one. A junior flight attendant leaned toward her and whispered, He made economy feel like a living room. Olivia didn't disagree. The curtain parted briefly as Captain Elena Brooks peeked through, giving her a quick update. "Arrival on schedule," she said. "Weather clear. We're right on time." She glanced toward row 24. "And it feels unusually calm back here." Unusually calm wasn't quite the word for it. Something more was happening. Something small, human, and healing. Maya returned to her seat, with her violin held a little differently now, not clutched in fear, but supported with quiet confidence. The brief, trembling notes she played lingered in the cabin, softening the edges of the flight. A few passengers gave her encouraging smiles as she passed. Even those who normally kept to themselves looked up with a kind of gentle curiosity, as if witnessing something rare and tender. She settled between her mother and the man in the hoodie. Elena brushed a strand of hair from Maya's forehead and whispered, "It sounded beautiful." Maya blushed, tucking the violin closer to her side. The man in the hoodie watched her with warm eyes. "How does it feel?" he asked. "Better," she admitted. "I thought it would sound tight from the pressure, but it feels normal again." "That's good," he said. "A stable bridge makes all the difference." She nodded, smiling more freely than she had since boarding. When Olivia approached to collect drink cups, he gestured politely. "May I have her case for a moment? I want to add a little protection while it's still in one piece." Olivia retrieved the case from the galley closet and handed it over. He opened his backpack and pulled out a small, neatly folded microfiber cloth. It looked like it had been used, washed, and refolded countless times. Not new. Not expensive. Just something that had clearly traveled with him for years. "A guitar teacher gave me this trick," he told Maya. "A soft cloth under the neck helps reduce rattle, especially during descent." He placed the cloth gently under the carved neck of the violin, ensuring there was no pressure on the bridge. His movements were careful and deliberate, as if the instrument belonged to him. Maya watched every motion with reverence. "That's it," he said quietly. "Now, it won't shift." She swallowed hard. "Thank you." "You're the one doing the brave part," he replied. "I'm just helping the violin stay calm." Olivia felt her throat tighten. This wasn't charity. This wasn't celebrity spectacle. It was the kind of ordinary kindness that came from someone who paid attention, who noticed small fears, small cracks, small burdens, and tried to ease them without making anyone feel small in the process. Captain Elena Brooks stepped back into the galley for "It's a moment," gathering a few supplies before returning to the cockpit. When she saw him adjusting the case, she paused. "That's thoughtful," she said softly. "We've been talking about improving policies for fragile instruments. And for mobility devices, too." He lifted his eyes to hers with calm interest. "Is there a way to make those policies easier to understand at the gate?" he asked. "Musicians get nervous traveling. Clear guidance helps." Elena's expression softened. "You're right. We're trying." He nodded once, quiet and respectful, as though he understood the weight of structural problems, but also believed in the power of small human fixes. Captain Elena Brooks lingered a moment longer before returning to the cockpit. Her eyes drifted over the passengers' calm faces, relaxed shoulders, heads resting comfortably against seatbacks. It struck her how different the cabin felt from most long flights. She glanced again at row 24, understanding now who had shifted the atmosphere without ever raising his voice or announcing his name. When she stepped away, Olivia remained nearby, pretending to adjust the service card while listening to the low conversation between Maya and the man in the hoodie. The way he guided her through quiet breathing before she tucked the violin away again sounded less like instruction and more like steady reassurance. When Olivia collected the case to return it to the closet, she noticed the small microfiber cloth folded perfectly under the neck. Simple, thoughtful, placed with the same care someone might use when tucking in a child for the night. "It won't rattle now," he murmured. Olivia nodded. "That was kind of you." He smiled gently. "Sometimes a tiny fix makes a big difference. She carried the violin back to the closet with new awareness. In a morning shaped by confusion and unintended consequences, kindness had knit the cabin together in ways she couldn't have predicted, and row 24 had become its quiet center. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the aircraft leveled into its final cruising segment. Passengers were beginning to settle into the subtle rhythm that always came before descent. Stretching legs, adjusting blankets, finishing drinks, preparing minds for the transition from sky to ground. Everything felt calm, almost peaceful, until the seatback screens glitched. First a flicker, then a ripple of digital static. Then every monitor on the plane, from first class to the last row of economy, froze on a single deep blue holding card. White text slowly faded into view. Dignity. First announcement on arrival. A hush rolled across the cabin. Passengers looked up in confusion. Some removed their headphones. Others tapped at their screens, trying to return to movies or flight maps, only to find the message locked in place. A few exchanged uncertain glances, unsure whether this was an error, a warning, or something far more unusual. Olivia felt her chest tighten. She reached, instinctively, for her operations tablet. Right on cue, it vibrated with a new notification. She tapped it open, her pulse quickening. Stand by for joint statement. That was all it said. No sender name, no explanation, no guidance. Her breath hitched. A joint statement meant something coordinated, something corporate, something public-facing, something that would follow them all the way to the gate. Her mind raced through possibilities, none of them matching the calm inside the cabin or the goodwill that had been growing since the seat swap. In first class, the curtain rustled. The blogger from earlier stood halfway in the aisle, phone already in hand, screen glowing with a fresh post. "Breaking," she whispered loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. "The airline is preparing something." Gate incident changed tone of entire flight. Half the section heard her. Several seatbelt clicks followed. Olivia pressed her lips together and stepped forward to maintain order. But before she could say anything, she felt a gentle pressure on her sleeve. It was Elena, Maya's mother. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Corporate has been testing a new dignity and access program," she said. "It's meant to help people with instruments, mobility devices, priority needs." But no one expected a live announcement today. Olivia stared at her, stunned. A live announcement? On this flight? While half the internet was talking about her gate decision, her throat tightened. Something was coming, and everyone on board knew it. Passengers sat up straighter, whispering across aisles, their earlier calm replaced by an undercurrent of anticipation. Even the faint hum of the engine seemed to fade beneath the weight of the words on the screens. Maya clutched her violin case against her chest. Her fingers curled around the handle as if holding onto it might anchor her through whatever was coming. She looked to her mother for reassurance. But Elena seemed just as unsettled, her eyes fixed on the nearest monitor. "Is this bad?" Maya whispered. Elena shook her head slowly. "I don't think so. But it's unusual." The man in the hoodie glanced at the screens with a thoughtful calm. "Announcements like this don't happen in the middle of a flight," he said softly. "If they're doing it now, it means someone pushed for it." Maya swallowed. "Because of earlier?" He didn't answer directly, but the gentle nod he gave said enough. Farther up the aisle, a businessman in glasses leaned toward a flight attendant. "What's this about? Is this safety related? Policy? Or something else?" His voice wavered with a nervous urgency. The attendant kept her tone steady. "We're waiting for instructions. Everything is safe. We'll update everyone as soon as we can." Olivia remained in the galley, gripping her tablet tightly. Her mind churned with questions she couldn't voice. Was this announcement connected to her? To him? To the video?
Had corporate decided to turn a moment of confusion into something larger? Something public? She tapped the tablet again, hoping for more information. Nothing updated. Behind her, a junior flight attendant approached with wide eyes. "I've never seen anything like this. All screens? At the same time? And the message says, 'Dignity first.' That's corporate level." Olivia nodded but kept her gaze forward. She couldn't let her voice betray the anxiety she felt rising through her chest. In first class, the blogger held her phone up again, whispering into the camera, "This is getting bigger. Whatever happened at the gate, it's turning into something none of us expected." Her words reached several passengers in economy, who turned toward the front, looking for any sign of what might unfold next. The blue screens held steady. The message didn't change. And with each passing minute, the tension in the cabin grew heavier. The aircraft continued slicing eastward through calm air. But inside the cabin, every passenger felt suspended between curiosity and unease. The blue holding card glowed like a silent countdown, a promise that something significant awaited them the moment the wheels touched the ground. Olivia stepped out of the galley and walked a few rows forward, pretending to check overhead bins, but really she needed to gauge the mood. People weren't panicking. They were alert, attentive, waiting. The quiet felt heavier than turbulence. When she reached row 24, Elena caught her wrist gently. "This program they're testing," she said, voice low. "It's supposed to improve how airlines treat people who are often overlooked. Musicians, elderly passengers, travelers with disabilities, people who get pushed aside without meaning to." She glanced at the man in the hoodie, then back to Olivia. "I don't think they expected a real moment, like today, to force their hand." Maya hugged her violin case closer. Did what happened at the gate cause all this? Olivia felt the question land like a stone in her stomach. She didn't want to lie, but she also didn't want to crush the calm that had settled around the girl. "Sometimes," she said slowly, "the world pays attention at unexpected moments." The man in the hoodie offered Maya a comforting nod. "Whatever this announcement is, it's not about blame," he said. "It's about making things better." Up front, the flight attendant phones began ringing in unison, one sharp bell, then another. Olivia watched the crew exchange glances. The lead attendant picked up, listened, then looked directly at Olivia. "They're almost ready," she mouthed. Almost ready for what? Olivia didn't know. But as she stood in the aisle, the blue message glowing across 100 screens, she felt one thing with absolute clarity. The flight was no longer just a flight. It had become a turning point. The cabin chime rang with a soft, deliberate tone. Not the usual ding for seatbelts or turbulence. This one carried a different weight. A cue that something out of the ordinary was about to happen. Every conversation faded. Even restless children looked up. Captain Elena Brooks' voice came through the speakers, steady and warm. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "we have a special message before our initial descent. I want to thank all of you for your patience today, and I want to thank our crew for their professionalism and care. Sometimes a flight becomes more than a trip. Sometimes it becomes a reminder of how we treat one another." Olivia stood in the galley, frozen between duty and emotion. Her heart beat hard enough to feel in her throat. Row 24 was completely still. Maya held her violin case against her chest. Elena placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. The man in the hoodie listened with quiet focus, as if he already understood the intention behind the stay. Captain's words. Captain Brooks continued, "We've witnessed moments of kindness today, moments of respect. We want to acknowledge that. And now, with his permission, we'd like to share a brief message from a passenger who helped bring today's spirit forward." A ripple went through the cabin. Passengers turned. Phones rose. But the man in the hoodie didn't stand. He didn't take a step down the aisle or accept any kind of spotlight. Instead,
He rested his hands loosely on his knees, looked around as if speaking to friends rather than strangers, and nodded once toward the front of the plane. Only after the captain finished did he shift in his seat. He spoke from where he sat. No grand gesture, no celebrity posture. Just a calm, grounded voice that slipped gently into the quiet air. "Thank you," he began. Passengers leaned in. Phones trembled slightly in people's hands. Not from excitement, but from the awareness that they were capturing something rare. "I don't need first class to feel respected," he said. "A seat doesn't decide anyone's worth. It doesn't tell the truth about who someone is." The cabin was completely silent, steady, breathless, waiting. He went on, "I want to thank Olivia for doing her job with respect. She enforced policy without humiliation. That matters." Olivia's eyes burned. She lowered her head. The man in the hoodie paused long enough for the words to settle, long enough for Olivia to feel the weight in them soften into something almost gentle. Several passengers turned toward her, offering small, understanding nods. She kept her hands folded tightly in front of her, steadying her breath. He continued in that same conversational tone, "I also want to thank the passenger who swapped seats earlier. You didn't do it for attention. You did it to make sure someone else could be comfortable. That kind of choice matters more than any upgrade ever could." The elderly man who'd received the new seat looked down at his hands, blinking hard. Maya glanced at him, then at the man in the hoodie, realizing the kindness around her had grown from one small moment into something larger. The man in the hoodie rested his elbows gently against the armrests. A lot of us travel tired, rushed, worried. Sometimes we forget. The people around us are going through their own struggles. A mom trying to get her kid to an audition. Someone with a fragile instrument. Someone who needs legroom because their body doesn't move the way it used to. Someone who's afraid of crowds. Someone who's alone. His voice softened even further. A boarding lane shouldn't define any of that. A murmur of agreement rippled through the cabin, not loud, not disruptive, just an instinctive response from people who recognized the truth in his words. Olivia watched him quietly, not as a celebrity speaking to fans, not as someone giving a performance, but as a man speaking from lived understanding. His tone wasn't polished or rehearsed. It was human, real, in a way that carried weight without force. He looked across the rows. "We all bring something with us when we fly. Worries, dreams, exhaustion, hope." His eyes shifted briefly to Maya. Sometimes a single act of dignity can change someone's entire day. Sometimes it fixes what's been broken for a long time. Maya's grip tightened on her violin case. Her mother wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. The man in the hoodie leaned back slightly, as if giving the cabin space to breathe. "So, maybe," he said, "what happened today isn't really about a seat at all. Maybe it's about what we choose to honor in each other." He let the silence deepen for a moment before finishing. When he spoke again, his voice had a thoughtful steadiness that pulled every ear toward him. "So, I want to leave you with a powder question," he said. "What if boarding felt like welcome? For every person, every time?" The words landed quietly, but they carried a weight no one could ignore. Phones recording the moment shook slightly in people's hands. A few passengers nodded. Others closed their eyes as if acknowledging a truth they'd forgotten to name. He didn't add anything more. He didn't repeat the line or try to drive it home. He simply let it rest in the air, trusting it to travel on its own. Maya looked at him in awe. Elena pressed a hand to her heart. The elderly man across the aisle wiped his eyes discreetly with a napkin. Even the businessman 2 rows up lowered his phone slowly. The expression behind his glasses unexpectedly softened. Olivia stood frozen near the galley curtain, her pulse thudding against her ribs. Hearing him say her name with respect instead of judgment had loosened something inside her she didn't know she was holding. The man in the hoodie leaned back gently in his conned seat, and the cabin, in perfect silence, breathed with him. The cabin remained still, suspended in the echo of his final question. For a long breath, no one spoke. Then, one by one, the seatback screens flickered again. The deep blue holding card dissolved into a new slate, simple, clean white text on a soft gray background. Dignity first. The words appeared slowly, with a gentle fade designed for readability. Even passengers who had trouble seeing small print could read every detail. A soft chime followed, and the first bullet point unfolded across the screens. Quiet boarding. A short description scrolled beneath it. Dedicated quiet boarding hours during peak congestion times to reduce stress for families, elders, and neurodivergent travelers. A stunned murmur spread through the rows. Several parents exchanged looks of relief. One mother with a toddler on her lap whispered, "Why hasn't that always been a thing?" A college-aged passenger nodded thoughtfully, as if recognizing how many people that policy could support. The next bullet appeared. Guaranteed instrument accommodation. Beneath it, clear closet space. Early stow protocol. No more last-minute panic or damaged instruments. Maya pressed a hand to her mouth. Eyes widening. She turned toward the man in the hoodie, her voice shaking. That's exactly what I needed. What every musician needs." He offered a small smile. "So no one has to fear their instrument cracking at 30,000 feet." She hugged her violin case tighter. A third bullet faded in. Caregiver and veteran priority. Then, trained staff escorts. Extra support for those traveling with mobility challenges, disability needs, or caregiving responsibilities. The elderly man who received the first-class seat looked down at his legs, then up at the screen, visibly moved. Elena blinked tears from her eyes, whispering, "My sister could have used this when she traveled for treatment." The fourth bullet appeared. No shame policy enforcement approach everything with solution, conversation, and privacy. Zero tolerance for public embarrassment. System audits for accountability. Olivia's breath caught. Her hand instinctively traveled toward her badge. The words landed with a quiet heaviness, one that felt like both a responsibility and a lifeline. She thought back to the moment at the gate. The eyes on her. The phones raised, and she wondered how different it could have been under a policy like this. Then the final bullet point unfolded, and the cabin collectively gasped. Miles for Good passengers can donate miles to reunite families during medical hardship or military leave. Keanu's foundation will match donations for the first year. Phones rose again, but this time, not for scandal, for history. A ripple of emotion moved through the cabin as the final bullet point settled on the screen. The words "Miles for Good" seemed to glow with their own warmth, as though the entire aircraft had been wrapped in a soft blanket of possibility. Passengers stared at the announcement. Not the way people stare at corporate policy, but the way they look at something that touches a place deep inside them. A young man in military fatigues, sitting near the exit row, ran a hand across his face. "I haven't seen my mom in 2 years," he whispered. This could actually get me home." Across the aisle, a woman scrolled through the details as they cycled back across the screen. "My niece has been in the hospital for months," she murmured. "Flying back and forth is almost impossible." Maya looked around the plane as if seeing the human stories woven into every seat, stories she'd been too nervous to notice before. "People really need this," she said quietly. The man in the hoodie nodded. "They do." Olivia stepped closer, drawn not by her role as crew but by the undeniable pull of what was unfolding. The screens began looping through the program again, each bullet point glowing with clarity and quiet intention. She had never seen corporate messaging so human, so considerate, so grounded in the needs she'd witnessed for a decade at the gate. Then the captain's voice returned, softer, this time. "This initiative has been in development for 2 years," she said. "What happened today reminded us why it's needed more than ever." Heads turned instinctively toward row 24. The man in the hoodie remained seated, posture relaxed but thoughtful. When the captain paused, He lifted his voice for the cabin, not loud, not formal, simply steady. "I've been helping to fund the pilot tests," he said, quietly, "with partners across the industry. But programs only grow when real people show what dignity looks like in practice." Passengers leaned in, hanging onto each word. "What happened at the gate wasn't anyone's fault," he continued. "It was a moment that showed how complex travel has become, and how simple respect can change the tone of an entire flight." Olivia felt her throat tighten again. She wasn't being shamed. She wasn't being singled out. She was being seen, included, understood. He nodded gently toward the screens. "This program is ready. Today proved it." The cabin went still. Not in tension, in recognition. The looping slate continued its slow rotation, each policy point glowing one after another, giving every passenger time to absorb what the program meant. It didn't feel like corporate messaging anymore. It felt like a promise, simple, clear, and long overdue. Olivia stepped into the aisle, unable to stay anchored to the galley. She wasn't required to move. No protocol told her to. Something deeper did. She walked slowly toward row 24, stopping beside Maya, Elena, and the man whose quiet presence had reshaped an entire flight. Maya looked up with wide eyes. "Is this really happening?" she asked softly. "It is," Olivia said. "I think today showed everyone why it matters." The girl nodded, hugging her violin case. "I feel safer. Like they thought about people like me." Elena squeezed her daughter's shoulder. "They did." A few rows ahead, another passenger raised a hand timidly. "Sir," he said toward the man in the hoodie, "does this mean other airlines might join too?" His voice trembled with cautious hope. "If they want to." This isn't about one airline winning. It's about changing how people travel. Olivia watched passengers absorb his words. Elderly couples, exhausted parents, business travelers, military service members, young artists chasing opportunities. She had greeted thousands of people over the years, many of them stressed, scared, or embarrassed before even reaching the jet bridge. Suddenly, she saw all of them at once, the humanity she'd tried to protect with rules, and the humanity this program was trying to uplift with understanding. The captain's voice returned gently. "We'll share more details at the gate. Thank you for being part of this moment." Passengers murmured with quiet excitement. The blogger in first class lowered her phone slowly, her expression shifting from sensational curiosity to something far more genuine. Olivia exhaled a long, steady breath. She looked at the man in the hoodie. "You've been helping build this for 2 years, she said, quietly. He shrugged modestly. "Dignity doesn't need noise to work." The words landed with a soft thud in her chest. The screens displayed the title one last time. Dignity. First, before fading back into flight maps. And for the first time in her career, Olivia felt a shift, not just in the cabin, but in herself. Something new had taken root. Something she wanted to protect. Something worth fighting for. The wheels touched the runway with a softness that caught everyone by surprise. No jolt, no bounce, just a clean, steady glide as if the aircraft itself understood the moment needed gentleness. Passengers straightened in their seats, releasing breaths they didn't know they'd been holding. The atmosphere felt nothing like the flight that had taken off in San Francisco. Something had shifted, subtle but undeniable. As the plane taxied toward the gate, the first clues appeared. Passengers near the windows murmured, pointing toward the terminal glass. Camera flashes, clusters of reporters, a live news van parked near the service road, security at the jet bridge in higher numbers than usual. Olivia felt her stomach twist. The clip had gone viral. She knew that. But she hadn't imagined this, an entire press presence waiting before anyone had even unbuckled their seatbelts. She braced herself instinctively. Shoulders tightening, breath shallow. She'd been in customer-facing work long enough to understand how narratives spun out of control, how one imperfect moment could be twisted into something unrecognizable. She whispered to herself, "Please, Don't let this become something ugly. The chime sounded again. Captain Elena Brooks stepped out from the cockpit, calm and composed. She walked with purpose down the aisle until she reached Olivia in the forward galley. "Come with me," the captain said softly. Olivia blinked. "Captain, if this is about the clip..." "It is," Captain Brooks replied. "But not the way you think. Walk with me." They approached the forward door together. Passengers watched, whispering, recognizing Olivia now from the clip that had traveled across the world in less than a day. Her badge, her posture, her calm, decisive movements. The moment she'd redirected a man she thought was in the wrong lane. Her chest tightened again, but then she saw him. The man in the hoodie, now standing beside the door, with quiet composure. Hands gently folded, expression warm. He nodded to her. "Stand with me?" he asked. Her breath caught. "Me?" Captain Brooks smiled. "And you did your job with dignity. It's time people see that." Before Olivia could respond, the flight attendants opened the door, and the jet bridge erupted in camera flashes. The flash of lights washed over the doorway the moment it cracked open. Reporters leaned in, microphones extended, camera shutters clicking in sharp bursts. Olivia froze at the threshold until she felt Keanu gently motion her forward, creating space beside him as though she belonged there. Passengers behind them hesitated before stepping out, unsure whether to avoid the cameras or witness the unfolding moment. But Keanu stayed steady, grounded, and his presence set the tone. Calm, respect, no spectacle. A reporter called out, "Mr. Reeves, is it true you were denied first-class boarding this morning?" Another shouted, "Did the airline mistreat you?" Keanu didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned, looked directly at Olivia, and offered her a reassuring smile before facing the cameras. "I want to be clear," he said. "There was no mistreatment. Olivia was doing her job, and she did it with professionalism and kindness." The reporters murmured, caught off guard by the gentleness of his tone. "She enforced policy without shaming anyone," he continued. "That is rare, and it's important." Olivia felt heat rise behind her eyes, the weight of fear she'd carried since the clip surfaced beginning to ease. But Keanu wasn't finished. He lifted a hand slightly, grounding the chaotic energy of the jet bridge. "And something happened today that reminded me what dignity looks like in real time," he added. "This crew treated every passenger with equal care. That's worth recognizing." Flashbulbs intensified. The narrative was shifting right in front of them. Captain Brooks stepped up beside Olivia, her voice steady. "We are proud of our team," she said. "This flight showed what air travel can feel like when compassion and order work together." Then, in front of the cameras, Keanu turned toward Olivia. "I'd like to ask you something," he said quietly, yet loud enough for the reporters to hear. She looked at him, confused but listening. "You're the kind of person who sees people," he said. "Not just tickets, not just boarding groups, people. That's the heart of the program we're building." She blinked, unsure where he was going. Keanu continued, "I want you to join our first National Dignity First Training Council as an advisor. You stay in your job. You keep your independence. But we need real frontline voices shaping this." Olivia's knees softened under her. The jet bridge went silent. Before Olivia could process the offer, movement caught her eye. Maya and her mother stepped into the jet bridge, the violin case hugged tightly against Maya's chest. Their faces were flushed from the noise and the cameras, but Maya walked with a new steadiness, as if the flight itself had lifted something inside her. A woman in a navy blazer approached, wearing a conservatory badge clipped to her lapel. She introduced herself as a representative from a New York youth program. She explained that she had been watching the flight updates all morning, moved by the story, moved by Maya's poise, and the way she played during the turbulence. She offered Maya a same-day audition slot and a full travel grant. Elena covered her mouth, stunned. Then, tears flowed, the kind that come when a door opens you never thought you'd reach. Maya didn't run to the representative first. She didn't run to Keanu. She stepped straight toward Olivia and wrapped her in a tight, grateful hug. Olivia held her gently, her own breath catching. Everything she feared that morning had turned into something she never expected. And in the bright hum of the jet bridge, the world watched a new beginning unfold. 6 months after the gate incident that had once threatened to define her career, Olivia stood at the edge of a jet bridge in a different kind of morning light. It was softer now, filtered through signage that had been redesigned with calm colors and large, clear lettering placed at wheelchair height. Travelers moved with less hesitation, less tension, as if the space itself had shifted to welcome them. A wheelchair user rolled slowly forward, guided not by a frantic relative, but by a trained airport volunteer wearing a vest labeled Dignity First Escort. The volunteer matched the traveler's pace, speaking gently and pointing out the accessible routes now clearly marked along the terminal. When they reached the doorway, a flight attendant stepped aside with a respectful nod, allowing the traveler to enter the cabin before the rush of boarding began. No pressure, no stairs, just space and time. Further down the terminal, a young violinist adjusted a soft navy blue instrument tag with the words "Reserved Closet Stow" embroidered on it. She exhaled with relief when the crew member at the gate greeted her not with suspicion or rigid policy, but with her name. She had been pre-registered through the new system, and the musician protocol was smooth, calm, and predictable. Her smile was small but full, the kind that bloomed only when a fear had been carried for years and was finally set down. At baggage claim, a soldier in uniform stepped onto the polished floor and paused when he saw a volunteer waiting with his mother's name on a placard. The escort walked him through the crowds quickly, clearing paths not with force but with empathy, all the way to a small roped-off area where his mother waited in tears. They embraced in a way that made travelers step aside without needing to be told. The Dignity First program had created these reunions with precision, matching donations with Keanu's foundation to fly families together during leave windows. Each scene wasn't captured as data or metrics. They were living markers of progress, moments where dignity was not an afterthought, but the starting point. And Olivia saw them everywhere now. She saw what changed. She saw what mattered. She saw the proof. Olivia stood at the front of a small training room tucked behind the employee concourse, sunlight spilling in through the narrow window beside her. She wore the same crisp uniform she had always worn, but now there was one subtle change. A small silver pin on her lapel, engraved with 2 letters, DF, followed by the word advisor. It was simple, almost modest, but every time she saw it in the mirror, she remembered the jet bridge in New York, the cameras, Keanu's offer, and the widening sense of responsibility that had followed. In front of her sat 12 new hires. Their faces were alert, a little nervous, the way she once looked during her first week in the job. They had notebooks open, pens ready, coffees untouched. She could see herself in them, steady, rule-driven, wanting to do everything right. She began not with a corporate video, and not with the viral story they all already knew too well, but with a sentence she had written in her little pocket notebook months earlier. Order makes kindness possible. She paused, letting the words sink in. It's something I used to believe in a very strict way, she continued. But now, I understand it a bit differently. Order matters. Policies matter. But how we carry them out matters even more. She didn't tell them Keanu's name. She didn't dramatize the moment at Gate B12. Instead, she described a situation neutrally. A passenger whose outward appearance didn't match expectations, a quick judgment call, and a decision to follow procedure without shaming anyone. She spoke of choices that shaped the tone of a flight before anyone even steps on board. Several trainees nodded, taking notes without the usual stiffness. She saw curiosity, not fear. Olivia moved, slowly around the room, leaning on stories from real flights. A violinist with a fragile instrument,
A mother traveling alone with 2 children and too many bags. A veteran who didn't want to announce his mobility needs in front of a crowd. She explained how Dignity First wasn't about ignoring policy. It was about delivering policy in a way that felt human. At the back of the room, a young trainee raised her hand. "Does it always work?" she asked. Olivia smiled gently. "Not always, but it works more often when we try." Across the country, in a quiet regional airport in Ohio, Keanu walked through a modest terminal where the floors gleamed from fresh polish and the chairs wobbled from years of use. He paused beside one of them, crouched down, and tightened a loose bolt with a small multi-tool he carried in his pocket. No crowd gathered. No one recorded it. It was just something that needed fixing. Volunteer escorts greeted nervous travelers by name, and Keanu spent a few minutes listening to their stories. A janitor approached shyly, holding a photo from an old Matrix poster. She explained that her daughter kept it taped above her bed for courage. Keanu signed it only when she asked softly, almost apologetically, and he thanked her for taking care of the building everyone depended on. By this point, the press had stopped using the word scandal altogether. They used a different word now. Standard. Across airports, the Dignity First protocol had become a model, not a headline. Musicians traveled without fear. Veterans boarded without chaos. Families felt seen instead of judged. And Olivia, standing at another gate watching the morning light spill across the polished floor, understood that the moment that once threatened her future had instead helped reshape an entire industry. The airport was still wrapped in its pre-dawn quiet, the same muted blue hour that had shaped so many of Olivia's mornings. The polished floor of Gate B12 reflected the soft overhead lights, and the terminal held that familiar hush that came before the first wave of travelers. It was the kind of quiet that made every sound feel significant, even the soft click of her shoes as she approached the podium. She set her bag down, ready to begin her usual checks, when she noticed a small envelope resting neatly at the corner of the desk. No name, no airline logo, just a plain ivory card, folded once, sealed with a simple crease. The kind of envelope that didn't belong in a place built on scanners and digital manifests. Olivia glanced around, out of habit. No one lingered nearby. No overnight crew. No cleaners finishing their rounds. Just the echo of distant footsteps and the soft hum of the moving walkway. She opened the envelope carefully, as if it might contain something fragile. Inside was a single microfiber cloth, neatly folded, new, soft. The kind of cloth a musician might use to protect an instrument's neck, or polish rosin dust from the wood. The kind of cloth Keanu had used on Maya's violin, tucked beneath the bridge with quiet intention. Beside it, a small handwritten card. The handwriting was steady and simple. The ink, a deep blue that curved gently across the page. Order makes kindness possible. Kindness makes order worth it. Olivia traced the words with her eyes again before she smiled. It wasn't the public recognition she had received in New York, or the press moment that reshaped her reputation. This was something different. Something private, something meant only for her. She folded the cloth once more and slipped it into the side pocket of her uniform, right beside her pen and the small notebook she carried every shift. It felt like a quiet talisman, a reminder of a day that had altered not only her work, but her understanding of what that work could do. She stood a little straighter, breathed a little easier, and whispered a soft thank you into the stillness. Olivia kept the cloth in her pocket as she moved through her pre-flight routine. It rested against the fabric like a small heartbeat, a reminder of the morning she had questioned everything about herself, only to learn she had been seen more clearly than she realized. She straightened the boarding sign, checked the jet bridge alignment, and tested the speaker system with the crisp professionalism that had always guided her. But now there was something softer behind each action. As the first crew members drifted toward the gate with sleepy smiles, Olivia felt the familiar rhythm settle into place. She briefed the team calmly, weaving in dignity-first protocols with the ease of someone who had lived through the program's birth. New hires listened attentively, some taking notes, others simply watching the way she carried herself. She no longer needed to mention the viral video. Her work carried its own proof now. A young flight attendant named Rachel paused beside her after the meeting. She had just finished training and wore her uniform with that blend of pride and nervousness every new crew member carried. "Olivia?" she asked softly. "Do you mind if I ask something?" "Of course," Olivia said, turning toward her. Rachel hesitated before speaking. "How do you stay steady, even when things feel unpredictable?" Olivia smiled with a warmth that reached her eyes. "I used to think steadiness came from rules alone, from strict lines and perfect order." She touched the pocket where the microfiber cloth rested. "Now I know. It comes from remembering that every person is carrying something fragile, a story, a fear, a hope." Rachel nodded slowly, absorbing every word. Olivia added gently, "Your job isn't just to enforce the rules. It's to make the rules feel human." The young attendant exhaled as if relieved, then whispered a simple thank you before heading down the jet bridge. Left alone again, Olivia looked out across the empty waiting area. Soon it would be filled with travelers, each one moving through their own quiet battles and private celebrations. She felt ready for them, ready to protect the order of the day, but also ready to protect the humanity inside it. And with the soft weight of the cloth against her side, she felt something else too, ready for whatever unexpected moment might walk toward her gate next. Across the country, the morning light in New York carried a different kind of quiet. In a modest rehearsal studio, tucked behind a youth conservatory, Maya stood barefoot on the worn wooden floor, her violin resting gently beneath her chin. A scholarship certificate hung on the wall, framed hastily by a proud administrator the day it arrived. Its edges still curled slightly, but Maya loved it that way. It reminded her of how quickly everything had changed. She tightened her bow, then paused. Her breaths came slow and steady, the way Keanu had shown her on the plane. During the turbulence, she opened the case and saw the soft microfiber cloth Olivia had placed there for her. At landing, a gesture meant to protect the instrument, but one that had protected her confidence too. Elena sat in the corner of the room, her scrub still on from an early hospital shift. Fatigue lined her face, but pride softened every feature. She watched her daughter with the kind of hope that rises after years of waiting for a chance. Maya lifted her violin and let the first note drift through the space. It came out warm, steady, the sound of someone no longer afraid of cracks in the wood or cracks in her own courage. She transitioned into a tender phrase, one shaped like lift and ascent, a melody that rose through the studio like the soft upward pull of an airplane leaving the ground. Elena closed her eyes, letting the sound wash over her, and in that quiet moment, the story that began at Gate B12 had carried itself across the country, not through scandal, not through spectacle, but through the steady, human work of dignity. Maya played on, each note rising like a small promise that kindness leaves echoes long after the moment has passed. Morning light streamed through the tall windows of the neighborhood arts center, warming the scuffed hardwood floors and filling the room with a gentle golden calm. It was early, earlier than most families arrived for weekend classes, but Maya was already there, violin tucked under her arm as she guided a younger student toward the mirror-lined wall. The child held a tiny bow in a trembling hand, unsure of where to begin. Maya knelt beside him, her voice soft and patient. "Relax your shoulders," she said. "Let the bow sit in your fingers, not grip them. Let it breathe with you." She positioned his hand gently, the way someone once positioned hers. The boy nodded, absorbing every bit of encouragement she offered. Several months had passed since the flight to New York changed the direction of her life. The scholarship certificate still hung in her small studio at the conservatory, but now she carried something deeper than a title. She carried confidence. She carried purpose. She carried the knowledge that strangers could choose kindness even when it wasn't required of them. From the doorway, Elena watched in her faded blue scrubs, holding a thermos from her overnight shift. Fatigue lined her face, but pride illuminated it, softening every worry. She leaned against the frame, letting the moment wash over her like a quiet, steady blessing. In the corner of the room, seated on an old folding chair, Keanu worked quietly on a piano foot. The instrument wobbled slightly, a problem most people ignored, but he didn't. He replaced the worn felt pad with careful hands, checking the balance and ensuring the foot sat evenly on the ground. He never positioned himself at the center of the room. He preferred places like this off to the side, unnoticed, letting others step into the light. When he finished, he sat back and listened, as Maya and her student began to play a simple duet. The melody was soft, almost hesitant at first, but it grew with each measure, filling the studio with a warmth that made the room feel larger than its walls allowed. The harmony floated upward, like a quiet reminder that beautiful things often grow from moments no one expected to matter. Keanu smiled faintly, listening to the sound of progress, the sound of dignity echoing in a place far from any airport gate. The duet drifted through the hallway, and other parents began to pause outside the door, catching traces of the soft exchange between the two young players. Maya guided the boy through each measure with quiet confidence, nodding gently whenever he faltered. When he missed a note, she didn't correct him with tension. She simply breathed out, reset the phrase, and encouraged him to try again. "That's it," Maya whispered. "Music isn't about perfection. It's about staying steady." Her own bow moved with the calm surety of someone who understood what it meant to be afraid of falling short. She thought of the hairline crack in her bridge, the fear she carried onto the plane that morning months ago, and the stranger who treated her dream with more care than she expected. She thought of Olivia standing tall in her uniform, steady even in her doubt. And she thought of the way dignity had shifted the air inside that aircraft, note by note, choice by choice. The young student finally reached the end of the passage, and Maya tapped the top of his violin gently. "You did it," she said. His face lit up with a spark that made Elena press a hand to her chest at the doorway. Across the room, Keanu stood and tested the piano pedal with one slow press. The creak was gone. The movement was smooth now, the way it had been when the piano was newer, before too many feet had worn it down. He glanced toward Maya, admiration in his eyes, not for fame, not for performance, but for the way she carried her growing sense of responsibility, for the way she was learning to give back the same quiet steadiness she once needed herself. As the two young students restarted their duet, Keanu moved toward the back wall, picking up a few scattered chairs and setting them neatly in place. He didn't interrupt the lesson. He didn't draw attention to himself. He blended his small acts of care into the rhythm of the room the way he always did, softly, intentionally, without need for recognition. The morning light shifted, catching the edges of the violin's curves and illuminating the dust motes floating gently through the air. The art center felt less like a practice room and more like a place where something bigger was quietly beginning. A place where dignity lived not in grand gestures, but in the smallest, most human details. As the duet wound to a gentle close, the room held a soft silence, the kind that settles only after a moment that feels whole. Keanu stepped forward just long enough to lift a folding chair that wobbled and set it aside for repair. Then he looked at Maya with a quiet pride that didn't need words, gave a small nod before stepping out of the frame, leaving the space to the young musicians. His voice came later in a brief cutaway, steady and thoughtful. "The welcome matters," he said. "It's the beginning of everything we build together." Back in the art center, the camera returned to Maya and her student. They reset their bows, ready to play again, filling the room with the fragile, beautiful sound of people learning how to trust themselves. A final reflection flowed over the scene in clean, simple cadence. Sometimes dignity is not a headline. It is a choice at a gate. Sometimes kindness is not loud. It is the way a seat is offered without a speech. Sometimes change does not begin with a policy. It begins with how we look at one another. If travel is 1,000 small moments, dignity is the thread that holds them together. The screen softened into the closing messages. If you believe welcome should be for everyone, tap like so this message reaches more people. Subscribe for more true-to-life emotional stories that celebrate quiet strength. Question for you. Have you ever seen a small act of travel kindness change an entire day? Tell us in the comments. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you. What story should we tell next about dignity and everyday heroes? Share your ideas. The last image belonged not to Keanu, not to Olivia, but to the two students playing a hopeful melody, one that sounded like lift, like steadiness, like the quiet rise of something better.